Hey guys, Professor Thom here, and I am so excited to bring you today to Mark MacDonald. He is the best-selling author of Be Known for Something, and also a blog that I love and have been following for years, Church Marketing Sucks. Mark, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. We've talked a little bit just before this, and I can tell that we're kindred spirits.
Absolutely. And so, Mark, I just want to dive in with, you are currently doing marketing for how many different churches, ministries, and organizations?
Well, in my current role with Generis, I think that they have something like 75,000
That's what I
churches
thought.
in their coffers, and then Center for Church Communication, where I'm executive director, that's about 10,000 churches. So there's churches everywhere.
So what brings a guy from East Canada starting out into the role that you're currently playing?
Oh man, and that's where, I am just a little kid from East Coast Canada. I keep looking in the mirror and I wonder who that old man is. Like inside, I feel young, and I also feel like I never want to lose my insatiable urge to learn more. And so that's why I don't ever want to become that mature adult who just is like the sage who can tell everybody everything. Because I mean, when I look back over my life, and it's getting a longer path as I look at it, I'm just amazed at how God has allowed me to take the path that I took. I mean, just even looking back, so I'm from New Brunswick. So if you go up I-95 all the way to the top, we're, 10 hours north of Boston. And New Brunswick is a fairly rural area. There's some urban areas, but they're not huge urban areas. And I grew up in the capital city. I was a newspaper carrier all of my earlier life. And I was the largest newspaper route in our whole city. And I kept thinking I liked, when I was honored as the largest newspaper route in the city. And yet, now I look at it and I look at my social media, and I don't know, I have 40 or 50,000 people that follow me. That was about the size of my entire city when I was growing up. So just to have the influence and to be able to talk to so many people, and maybe this is going to get too far into it, but there's so many people that think, man, I'd like to have notoriety. I'd like to be the YouTube star. But if you were instantly propelled to that, would you have the message? And that's the problem today, is that everyone wants to be a star, but no one wants to be a star for a particular message. And I believe that, along the path that God leads you, he's going to give you a message, and you're going to learn so much along the way. And if you can focus that message to a desired large enough audience, you'll become successful, whatever that means.
Wow. So what was the path you took? What was like the first job you got leaving the newspaper industry? How did you make the transition into working for ministries, churches?
Well, I won't tell you about my soup, salad, and sandwich bar days.
Oh, wow. That sounds fun, though.
Yes, that's what got me through high school. But so I went to a small Christian college, actually, a small Christian school first in New Brunswick. We were the very first Christian school in our entire province. And so much so that when my parents pulled me out of public school and put me into a Christian school, that the government actually went to my parents and they gave them truancy papers to say that I had to, that I needed to go back into government, this government system. And I think at that point in my life, I started to realize, wow, okay, being a Christian today, what does that mean? And being holy, I mean, that just means being set aside as something different. Well, I was propelled to being something different through the Christian school movement. Then after Christian school, I decided to go to a Christian college way down in South Carolina, which and many of you will probably recognize, but I went to Bob Jones University, which was one of those things where I knew nothing about Bob Jones University. In fact, the furthest south I had ever been up until that point was New Hampshire. And when my parents drove me to South Carolina and dropped me off at the college, it was this weird awakening of, I can't believe that God's allowing me to be here. I went onto campus and I couldn't believe they actually manicured their lawns. I had never seen that in my entire life. They did edging. I had never seen that. And what they taught me was that there was a certain quality that's an expectation for believers. And out of that, I guess that my parents left. After I got a haircut. That's like a whole other thing. But they drove away, and I remember walking back into my dorm, realizing, okay, I don't know anyone from here to 1,500 miles away where my home was, and then the realization of, and no one knows me, so I can be anything that I want to be. And from that moment on, I guess all through college, I started realizing, you know what, it's more about what you want to do than what you are coming from. And I mean, that just kind of started the path. I graduated from college, went back to East Coast Canada. And like, weird aside that happened, so the college had originally asked me to stay on and teach, and my immigration status was not approved. So that booted me out of South Carolina back to New Brunswick. And at that point, I got back home. I hadn't looked for a job or anything. So while I was, going from agency to agency to agency, kind of saying, I would really like to work for you. I needed to make some money. So I started modeling, and so I went into a modeling career. And since then, I guess I've done modeling for Toyota and Ford and Lowe's and Tommy Hilfiger. And so that's always been kind of a long side of my career path. I've always, I taught male modeling in New Brunswick. Well, I was working my way up through college or through the agencies. What's really kind of cool was the Bob Jones in me said, if you're going to go for an interview, you go dressed up. And so I remember putting on my full suit and tie and walking in with my portfolio. The first agency I walked into, the guy who was interviewing me said, okay, first of all, I've never had anyone come in with a suit and tie before. And I said, this is a special day for me, and I would want to dress special for you. And he hired me on the spot.
Wow.
So, which started to teach me a lot about, being different, being unique, and being able to sell that uniqueness. From there, that agency hired a vice president of another agency away from the big agency. And as soon as I knew that we had hired somebody away, I thought, I wonder if they would be interested in I were to go to them. So I started talking with them. They hired me. And then I went from studio manager to graphic designer to art director to senior art director to junior creative director to creative director and then senior creative director. And that path that I clawed my way to the top of one of Eastern Canada's largest ad agencies was really pivotal to me, because I started to realize during that path, why doesn't the church know this stuff?
Mm.
And as much as I love talking with, companies and entrepreneurs, and I worked in on the political side as well. And during that time, I was creative director on one of the most winning campaigns in all of Canadian history. And what we did was we formulated who that person was, and we would sit in the room with that person, and like we talked like he wasn't there, like we talked like as though he was a commodity. And that's when I realized there is a difference between who you are and what your perception is. And again, just little by little, I started seeing how, you know what, there's an awful lot about life that I don't know. And so out of that, I went and became vice president of marketing for one of my clients. I hope I'm not boring everyone to death, but it was interesting, because when I joined the big agency, I told them that I would not work for anything I didn't believe in, which was alcohol, cigarettes, and the lottery, because I knew that they had those accounts. Mm-hmm. And they said, no, if you come to us, we will never expect that you will ever work for them. And then along the way, the lottery took a look at the agency. They came over and they said, we really like what Mark MacDonald's doing. Can he be the creative director on our account? And I said, yeah, remember, I said I wouldn't do that. Agency was perfectly fine with that until the client said, no, we want Mark MacDonald. And they came back to me and said, it doesn't matter, you're going to have to do it. And then they said those magic words, but it doesn't matter. We don't have to make this public. You'll just have to work on it inside the agency. It was one of those biblical things where it's like, so should I just go ahead and do it even though I know it's not right? No one will know. And I ended up quitting, and because I just didn't want to do it. And so I became vice president of marketing for one of my accounts, which was an internet company that, when the internet was just really fledgling, and I ended up we created the very first internet-based training program for Microsoft, and you could do Microsoft Office User Specialist certification through a dial-up modem, and so I traveled around the States and got to sell that to various organizations. Had to stand in front of everybody and say, so here's what a modem looks like, and you plug it into your computer and then it goes ding, 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 and so through that, I ended up deciding to come to the United States, to North Carolina, to Winston-Salem, and we took over the office space that the Krispy Kreme donut company had their marketing team. And we set up an agency for churches, and mainly because I couldn't believe that the church didn't know these things. Like, there were just so many things that as I talked to pastors, that they just were not aware of, and especially with the internet and trying to get a digital footprint. So we set up that agency. We started working with National Association of Church Business Administration, National Association of Church Design Builders, National Association of Church Facility Managers, and that propelled me into speaking at conferences. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the rest is like there's a whole bunch more, but I feel like I've talked too much.
So what are, like, you Talk about how you just can't believe the churches didn't know these things. What are the biggest things the churches didn't know that you knew that you were filling that need by starting that agency?
Well, it's interesting because another little, so I had the whole modeling thing, and when I moved to North Carolina, I ended up working, doing that, continued to do that because they just paid too much. So it was just easy. It's hard for me to say no to that. But on this, at the same time, I had recorded an album and I started singing. I recorded an album with Sandy Patty and the Gaithers, and used their producers. And as so I did about 300 concerts, which allowed me to really get to know a lot of churches and talk to a lot of pastors. And what I would typically find is that as I sat down with them, I would say, so what do you do for marketing? And they would go, marketing? We don't do marketing. We're the church.
Yeah, you just have to have faith, right?
Isn't that the case, Tom? I mean, if you just believe it, they will come.
But they do pass a plate around. So
that's true. That's true.
They do have mechanisms in place.
But it's so crazy. What I realized was the perception of marketing was not really what marketing is.
Yeah.
A lot of people believe that marketing is concocting something that's not true and forcing everyone to believe it. And every pastor says, oh my goodness, no, what I believe is ultimate truth and it's God's word. And I mean, if we stand on God's word and we proclaim God's word, people will just come. And now back in the 70s and 80s, sure, that probably worked a little bit more. But then all of a sudden, declining churches, a lot of people realize, well, maybe there's more to this thing called marketing, church marketing. And I mean, ultimately it's become church communications. And again, I think it's more because people are scared of that marketing word.
Yes.
But what I started to say to pastors is, because I always knew if I wanted to talk to the hand, it was talk about marketing. But instead it was, so what do you think you're known for in your community? And the pastors would oftentimes go, oh, that's a good question. Well, I think we would be known. And then I started thinking, well, what if you could actually be known for the right things? And really, God just worked in my heart and kind of put that seed of, okay, so what if you didn't talk about marketing and instead you talked about what you should be known for? And really the rest is history. I mean, along the path, after conferences, magazines would ask if I'd write some articles, and started writing for Church Marketing Sucks, and then a few other outlets. And I mean, I think right now I'm a little over 800 magazine articles that I've written. My editor keeps saying every time that she reads my article, she goes, I don't know how you do it, but you said that totally different, but it's the same thing over and over again. And that's pretty much what my life is. It's just trying to figure out, how do you say it a little bit different each time, but you got to become known for something that's relevant and needed, or else you will be ignored. And that's where the church is at today.
Yeah, and I can totally identify with you as far as how they view the word marketing. Because for me, whenever I've worked with nonprofit organizations, Christian ministries, it's almost like the marketing person, if they do embrace them, is kind of like the necessary evil. They have the things they do on the ministry side, and then there's the marketing guy that helps make it happen, but we don't really like to talk about him in that kind of way.
But Tom, it's really interesting that kind of brings up this war, the tension between good communications, which is really
Mhm.
marketing, good church communication and leadership of the church. And what I've seen after working with, thousands of churches, the role of communications used to be, who does the church sign? Like
Right.
who puts the real pithy thing out there, or that comical thing that I hope that our churches aren't known for that. But anyway, but they put the sign out, or there's the bulletin. And and I mean, every church, wants to die before their bulletin dies. And it was a secretarial position that looked after that. Where now they're called ministry assistants, or whatever the new terminology is. There's a difference between the headspace of dealing with an assistant versus dealing with the headspace of a marketing person.
Yep.
And I think that that's something that's really critical to understand before you jump into the church world. The church world has always had the leadership decide the content, and here, put it into the channel, put it out on the church sign, put it into the bulletin. And then the secretarial position, the assistant's position, goes, yes, sir, click, 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 and puts it in. And there's not a lot of, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. There's not a lot of change that happens, or even suggestions of change, other than proofreading or typos and, catchy
Right.
grammar and stuff. And so now, as a church communicator comes into the role, and they're perceived as an assistant or in a secretarial position. So the first time that they go, you know what, no, you should actually do it this way, it immediately causes the tension of, why are you pushing back against me? Because no one has ever pushed back against me. And that's where I want to talk to pastors now to let them know, no, the communicator needs to be at a leadership position so that they assume the ability to make sure that the actual communication is formed the right way, in the right channels, has the right priority, like all of that stuff. And if you can't trust somebody to let them lead in that vantage point, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I so much with my students get into the idea of, it's not just about execution, it's strategy. And that has to be a key part of it. So let's say we've got a student who's just graduated and they've been picked up by either a ministry or a church somewhere. How do they help that organization try and figure out what they should be known for?
Well, first of all, I think, Tom, we should stop and pray for them right now, because they're in for a ride of their life. Let
Yep.
me just say. So oftentimes when a church leader has lost traction, so when in the big agency, someone would come to us, and if they were a company and they would say, we need a marketing campaign, the first thing we would say, so tell us a little bit about your growth. And almost always people have either plateaued or declined, and that's why they finally come to an agency for help.
Yep.
The more the decline, the harder it is to bring them out of the decline. If they're plateaued, it's awfully hard to get growth out of a plateau. So enter into church world. Most pastors today, I mean, 85% of churches are not growing. They've either plateaued or they're in decline. So they're because they're very entrepreneurial. Most pastors are very much like the entrepreneurs that we dealt with in secular businesses. If something's not working, they just try something else. So they're trying the shotgun approach. It's like, whoa, partridge, king, 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 just try to, get it. And the problem is that they've fallen into that trap of let's just keep trying new things and something will stick. And I don't even want, okay, so as you'll probably find out, if I think it, I have to say it. So most times they see it working in another church, but it's just the perception that it's working in another church. So then what do, Tom?
Copy it, baby.
Rip it off. Like they just steal it and they think, wow, if it looks like it's working over there, it's going to work over here. And the problem is that they don't become known for something. They just become known for the thing that somebody else is known for. And the problem most times is that the church that he just ripped it off from isn't known for anything other than a whole bunch of really cool sermon series. And the sermon series cycle is something that comes and goes over a very short period of time. When we're talking about learning what your thread is, that thing that you become known for, this is like DNA based. This is something that goes so much deeper than a sermon series. So that student who is entering into the church world needs to know that they're thinking very short term and very cyclical. And so don't come in thinking, no, we got to create a brand, that brand positioning, the tagline, that thing that's DNA based, because the pastor's going to go, okay, that's good. So, and then a month later, he's going to say, okay, I came up with another one, because that's what they do. And so the communications person oftentimes needs to, first of all, be careful you don't try to get people to change and come over to your way of thinking too fast. Become known for listening first. Listen, figure out the politics, who has more say than other people, the relationships that you're dealing with there. There is a weird formula in every organization, and you've got to figure it out before you start making too many waves. And then as soon as you figure it out, start talking influence, explaining, hey, pastor, I saw this with this other church, because they'll always listen to that. And look how they have this thread that kind of connects all of those sermon series, and like just slowly move towards, the understanding of a thread, or get them to read my book. But that's that's a whole other thing. And the way that the book has been written is that every chapter ends in questions that need to be answered by the leader before you continue on to the next chapter. But ultimately, to create a thread, you have to understand your audience. Effective communication rises and falls on how well you know your audience. You have two audiences in the church. You have internal audience and external audience, your congregation and your community. You have to figure out what's a very stereotypical description of what that audience is. And it can't just be internal. It has to be, there needs to be enough people outside of your congregation, like the sales pipeline, to be able to pull and grow from that. So figure that out. Those are called personas. You got to figure out your personas. And the big thing with your personas is you got to know what they're waking up and what's on their mind, even if they're believers. And it's a sad truth, but most believers are not rolling out of bed and going, man, if only I could make mature and multiply disciples for Jesus Christ. And the problem is that most of our churches have become known for a very religious, overly religious vision and mission. And that has to be converted to what is the thing that's weighing on most people's hearts. And then if you can become known for a solution to that, and then they engage with the solution, the thing that you want to become known for, that's when you say, but the reason why that's so important is because of Jesus, and then tie them into Jesus. And our communities will be attracted more to us. I'm not saying to water down the message. The message needs to remain strong, biblical, and yet we need to, like Jesus did, he knew how to use something secular to attract the attention. Like, I love that story. Jesus walks a great distance away from his disciples. He sits down by the well. What a great place to sit down. Like, he knew every person who was coming there would have the same concern on their mind. I need water. And he engages with the woman as she walks up about water, and he gets her attention. They have a conversation about water, and then he says, well, what if I could give you water that you never thirst again, which is the connection between what's engaging with a community into the spiritual. And that's really where we need to be as a church today.
Cool. And what I love about all this is that it is totally applicable to the church, but it's equally applicable to any secular business as well. The reality is it all comes down to that unique selling proposition. What is unique about us? And what I always ask my students, who is it you're serving and how are you serving them? And, and you talk personas, I talk avatars, same thing, but
Same thing.
Absolutely. So give us an example, if you could, of a particular organization you were dealing with that was kind of not necessarily heading in the right direction, and that by getting them to think through some of these questions, that it changed how they were doing things and made them more effective.
Wow. And do that in 5 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interestingly enough, as soon as you start talking to pastors about a persona, or an avatar, or an audience, like, you just need to figure out, if you try to reach everyone, you will reach no one. And that's what oftentimes the pastor's been told: go into all the world and teach the gospel, preach it from to everybody. Well, yeah, Jesus did die for everybody, but that doesn't mean that the local church can reach everybody. One organization can reach a people group the same way that our missions groups create missionaries to reach people groups. And so, we were working with a church that was somewhat out of control, just lots of different things, so, I'm thinking in the book. So Kingwood United Methodist, we started working with them. Great group of people. Their hearts were in the right spot. They wanted to reach Kingwood, which is just outside of Houston. And at the time when we started working with them, we tried to figure out, so who lives around you? Like, what's your community makeup? And what we realized through a lot of focus groups and talking to people and surveys is that there were a lot of people that work and had come in from outside to work in the oil industry. And similar to today's environment, the oil industry had just collapsed. And so people who had given their lives and like had moved the full commitment towards oil because we're going to get rich, all of a sudden realized that, wow, my whole life has just collapsed from underneath of me. And what we heard over and over again was the disappointment in the oil industry. And as I love doing focus groups because I just love people. And as I started talking to people, they said, you know what? I know that there's got to be more to life. And we heard more to life so many times in our focus groups that we decided, why doesn't your church just become known for that there is more to life? And what that does, and I call it a thread, and I know that it's a brand positioning statement, it's a tagline, it's a unique selling proposition. We kind of invented calling it a thread because of social media, and most people understand. And then another issue that's happening in the church today is that a church becomes known for one thing, but then their student ministry wants to become known for something totally different. And then their children's ministry wants to become known for something else. And then the knitting club wants to be, oh, they can do it, I can do it. And I want my own logo, and I need my own name, I need my own colors, I need my own fonts and all that stuff. So ministry silos are just springing up everywhere. And the more silos that you have, the more people don't know what the farm's about. Right. And ministry silos will eventually just destroy the farm. There's no way that you have the budget to be able to promote all of these silos. So the thread is the thing that pulls it all together, and every one of, like a student ministry, think about More to Life. I mean, how a student can understand More to Life, how a child can understand More to Life, how a senior looks at it like Ecclesiastes, soap bubbles, all soap bubbles. I mean, there's got to be more to life than this. And so what it does is it starts connecting a large group of people, and people almost get to a point where they don't care about the church. It's like, tell me a little bit about this More to Life, and how do you do that? And as soon as in marketing, as soon as somebody says, okay, I like your brand story, I like your brand promise, so how do you do that? Because that's what I'm looking for. And if you can get them to a point where they say, that's what I'm looking for, I didn't expect to get it from a church, winner. Like then you start talking about your features, you start talking about all of your ministries, you talk about the things that you have for their whole family. And it's the focus that the church has to have on the thread first, that's connected directly to the audience, not to the pastor. And then the pastor just needs to talk about it all the time and tie it in so that it's used over and over again, so you become known for it.
Absolutely. And I've one thing I've had a difficult time with some is that a pastor or even a business owner will post something once and think, well, I've said it. So how do you get them to understand that for them it has to kind of be a constant drumbeat?
If they're not tired of saying it, it hasn't been said enough. But the problem is that a lot of the preaching, teaching, that's called a seminary, they've been taught that if it's important, say it once. If it's really important, say it 3 times. And there's a difference, because you don't want to create noise with it, because the more you say something, the more redundant you become, the more people realize they don't have to listen quite so much. Mm-hmm. So you don't want that, but instead you want to subtly weave it through everything, like that thread. So back in North Carolina, we're in Jacksonville, Florida now, but in Winston-Salem, I had a Sunday school class, and as I was writing my book, I was setting up this class. So we came up with the thread of simple and practical. And the way that it worked for us was that we realized a lot of people talked about the complexity of our church. It was a big church. There's lots of things going on. We had a new pastor who tended to have a lot of points to his sermons. There was just a lot of complexity. And so we said, okay, well, if complexity is the problem, why don't we create a Sunday school class that's just all about being simple? And the 40s and 50-year-olds that we attracted, they just wanted simple. Like, life is far too complex. And I said it all the time. Life is far too complex to come here and get more complexity. I would read scripture and I would say, whoa, this scripture, how on earth are we going to find something simple out of it? And it's weaving it very, very carefully through everything. And then we always talked about, well, here's the simple truth, and let's make it practical. And so simple and practical. So we had 160 people end up coming to our Sunday school class. When we left and we moved to Jacksonville, Florida, we got cards and letters. People were so kind. In fact, I still get text messages from people. There's like, when are you coming back? We miss simple and practical in our church. Almost every card and letter has simple and or practical in it as part of it, because they came to our class for simple and practical, and we delivered it every single time. And we left, and no one took over the simple and practical thread and took it on. Instead, the class kind of broke up, and they went off to various things. But many churches today have to start taking a look and say, so if you left your community, what would they even miss?
Right.
Because we have so many churches in our communities that it's like, oh, my poor church is gone. Oh, look, another church. And if you're only known for being a church today, you're not in a good position. You have to make sure that you're actually known for something more than being a church, and it needs to connect directly with something that's relevant and needed.
That's awesome. Well, Mark, I could probably talk on with you for like 3-4 hours easily and not even exhaust half of what we could get into. But I want to be respectful of your time. But I do want to ask you one last question that I ask everybody. And that is, what is the one thing you wish you'd known when you were first starting out?
Wow. And see, I want to go down the path.
It can be professional, it can be personal.
Well, and okay, so it's going to be two things.
Okay, that works.
So the first thing is, the sooner you know what you want to be known for, the more you can put a plan in place to making sure that you're known for it. So that's like the professional. That's, if I look back on my life, there were a lot of little wanderings that I had. The whole idea of be open to every opportunity, but just don't say yes to all of them. Oftentimes I feel like I wandered a little bit, where I wish that I would have just committed to knowing what I wanted to be known for. And then that way I could say no a whole lot easier. But I look back over my life, and I know I burned some bridges that I wish that I had never burned. And I'm sure that you've read Donald Miller's book, Story Brand. And as I read it, I mean, there were times that I teared up, because and this is probably even more important than that last one, is make everyone around you a hero. And be sought after as being a guide. You don't have to be the hero all the time. In fact, every time that I look back and I think I wanted to be the hero, I wish I would have been the guide. And I think that every person, especially in college, know that every person you come in contact with will end up coming back into your life somehow. Like, it's just crazy how God brings people full circles. And if you tick somebody off, they're for sure going to come back around.
Yeah. I tell my students that 80% of life is working and playing well with others. So it's amazing. It is people stuff.
It really
that is awesome.
And that goes back to what I said earlier about, be known for listening. Like, really listen before you start spewing what you think is right.
That's awesome. Mark, I can't thank you enough for the time you've taken with us today. If my students or anyone watching or listening to this wants to find out more about you and what you do, what's the best way to get in contact with you or to enter your world?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, beknownforsomething.com, since I've said it so many times, Be Known for Something, that's probably the best place. You can find all my social media links there. You can buy the book there. You can buy it on Amazon as well. But on social media, it's Mark Mac 1023, which is my birthday. So Mark MacDonald was already taken. There's another author out there, and his name's the same as mine. So Mark Mac 1023 is the one that I use.
Mark, thank you so much for taking this time with us.
Thank you, Tom.